There are some areas of Central Africa, specifically some Cameroonian tribes who believe that we are born with 4 eyes. 2 are closed and will be open when death comes. And if a child is born with the 4 eyes open, he can see the invisible ancestors. But if that's not the case and a man has a visionary or a healer vocation and wishes to become a Ganga or a healer, they prepare an initiation ceremony where he received the eyes of a goat, which will transmit its power of vision at the moment it's sacrificed. As the writer Patrick Harpur explained, this metaphor of the double vision has been widespread in many cultures around the world. That's what William Blake's call to see with the eyes, the literal and material world, the facts, or to see through the eyes, the world of the invisible essences, the realm of imagination, that use a symbolic and metaphorical language to create a meaningful narrative that underlies the facts. And it seems that our Western culture, with its materialist and rationalist and mostly secular beliefs, has been specialized in developing the first kind of vision. But what happened to us when someone that we really love died? How do we deal with all those emotions and feelings that continue existing despite their physical absence? How do we deal with all their belongings impregnated with their smell, with all those special calendar dates, with all those places where we share beautiful moments? How do we deal with what Aldous Huxley called the presence of the absence? This invisible, immaterial, but emotionally charged presence that survives the biological death of our loved ones. In 2015, ICEERS and the Beckley Foundation joined forces to start a research project at a privileged place, that's the Temple of the Way of Light in the Peruvian rainforest. This is one of the larger ayahuasca centers in the world, hosting more than 800 people from more than 50 different countries. This center is placed in the intersection between the indigenous Shipibo traditional practices and a variety of integrative approaches, emphasizing ayahuasca as vehicle for healing, growth, and personal transformation. So one of the main objectives of this study was trying to answer to the question, could ayahuasca, the vine of death, the vine of the souls and of the spirits, used in traditional shamanic context, be a useful psychotherapeutic tool to treat grief in Western users? So to answer this question, we designed an observational prospective longitudinal study, and we use an online data collection system in the cloud and conduct the baseline assessment 50 days after arriving to the Temple of the Way of Light, and 50 days after leaving the temple, we conduct the post-assessment. And in order to observe the stability of our results, we conduct a 3, 6, and 12 months follow-up assessment. So the retreat, so at the Temple of the Way of Light make available retreats between 9 and 30 days, where they drink ayahuasca between 5 and 9 times. So in the case of our sample, people drank ayahuasca an average of almost 7 times in a maximum period of 30 days. Here you can see the flow chart of the study. And of the 99 participants who signed the informed consent, 40 were excluded because non-baseline were available. Later, 10 were excluded because non-follow-up were available. and 3 participants expressed their desire to abandon the study. So at the end, 46 participants were eligible for the analysis. And here you can see the demographic data of these 46 participants, where the 67% were female, with a median age of 40 years. More than a half were single, had a university degree, and were non-religious. And around 70% have lost a first degree relative in an average period of almost 7 years, And the main cause of death was illness in the 58% of the sample, and in an unexpected way, such as suicidal or accidents in the 32% of the sample. Almost and a half have been previously diagnosed, most of them with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, because the persistent complex bereavement disorder wasn't exist until 2013. And more than a half have attended to previous psychotherapy, and 28% had previous medication. And the whole sample, around 70% were naive users of ayahuasca. And here you can see the outcomes in the principal scale, that's the present feeling scale within the Texas Revised Inventory of Grief. This scale assesses the known acceptance of death and some emotional and cognitive responses to the loss, such as the sadness or painful memories related with the disease. And as you can see, there is a significant improvement after the retreat, which is maintained during the year, over a year. But let me show you also this graph where you can see the evolution in the severity of grief in 2 different groups. The first one is formed for those individuals who didn't drink ayahuasca again during the follow-up. And the second one is formed by the 32% of the sample who continues using ayahuasca over the year after the retreat. So as you can see, the group that didn't drink ayahuasca again, that's the purple line, progressively and slightly decreased the improvement of the symptoms reached in the post-assessment. And on the other hand, the group that continued using ayahuasca manages to stabilize the improvement in their grief symptoms in a maximum score of 53, which is a very low severity of grief. And at the end of the year, we can find almost a significant difference between both groups. So having into account that the 32% of our sample is a very small sample, it's probably that we can find differences in the grief, in the improvement of the grief symptoms if we were broaden the sample. So this graph shows that the continued use of ayahuasca can stabilize the improvement of the symptoms reached after these first ceremonies. Yeah. So in this table, you can see the outcomes in the psychopathological symptoms assessed with the symptom assessment 45. And this table shows the mean differences between all the follow-ups and the baseline assessment, and also the standard deviation and the co-SD to interpret the size of the retreat effect. And as you can see, there is a significant improvement after the retreat in depression, anxiety, hostility, interpersonal sensitivity, and somatization, which is maintained during the follow-ups with the exception of depression and hostility. And given that the baseline score in hostility is within the normal range for an American population, because the half of our sample was American, to return to the baseline score in hostility is not clinically relevant, but that's not the case of depression. So maybe the most important information that we can draw from this table is that after the retreat, there is a significant improvement in all those symptoms that are maintained during the follow-up, despite we can observe some waves of sadness during the integration of a loss. And this often happens because there's no way to recover the physical contact with our loved one. So mourners move from an intense despair and anguish in the aftermath of a death to some kind of bittersweet emotions at the end of the grieving process. And here in this table, you can see the improvement on all the symptoms related with the quality of life that have been improved after the retreat and also are maintained during the follow-ups. So the improvement in physical health is commonly linked to an improvement in the quality of sleep and rest, and also into easing the somatic pain and digestions. And the improvement in psychological health is commonly related to feel more relaxed, to seeing life more positively, and also to have more clarity in taking decision and to have more confidence in oneself. And the improvement in the social relation aspect is commonly linked to be open to the others and to deepen in the relation, and also to appreciate the simple moments with family more, and to feel compassion for the suffering of others. So here you can see how the results of the questionnaires are also reflected in the answers of the participants about how they perceive the clinical effect of ayahuasca in their grieving process. And nobody says that ayahuasca have had a negative impact in the grieving process. Only 2 people affirm that ayahuasca had no influence in the grieving process, and 33 people says that ayahuasca have had a positive effect in the grieving process, yes? We also know that 3 participants begin to attend psychotherapy at 3 months follow-up, and 3 more at 6 months follow-up. So once again, it seems that between 3 and 6 months could be a critical period for mourners in the relapse on their symptoms in some mourners. No? On the other hand, nobody take medication again after the retreat, and everybody except 1 person explained and affirmed that the ayahuasca that they drank at the temple have some kind of persisting benefit during the follow-ups, especially related with the spiritual growth in the 84 to 89% of our sample, followed by the benefits on mental health in the range of 77 to 80% of our sample. And we have collected the report of 1 man who expressed that he feels some kind of adverse effect that persists of the ayahuasca that he drank in the temple, related with their social relationships. We don't know more. Another different participant expressed a short bout of depression at 6 months follow-up. And another different participant, there's 3 different participants, expressed something that you can read here at 12 months follow-up. He says, "I believe that I have had trouble grounding back into the human experience. Almost that I was shot into another realm, but now what? Now what happens in the real world that I come back to? How do I integrate into this? I'm still working on answering that." So this report highlights the necessity to adapt or to develop new psychological methodologies to assimilate and accommodate these kind of experiences in our daily life. And I'm pretty sure that many of you are working on that, so I would like to encourage you to assess the methodology that you are using in order to expand and develop the repertoire of techniques that could be useful in this important process of integration, and thus continue advancing the field of psychedelic therapy. Well, beyond, as we wanted to assess the long-term effects of ayahuasca in clinical symptoms, we wanted to know more about the mechanisms underlying the improvement that we have seen previously. So, based on previous scientific literature, we took the opportunity to assess two psychological processes that are considered important mediators in some of the third wave generation therapies. The first one is acceptance, that is defined as the acceptance of unwanted feelings and thoughts in the pursuit of one's values and goals. And it's because many studies have shown that this concept, formulated in negative, that is the experiential avoidance, defined as the attempts to alter the form, frequency, and situational sensitivity of these negative private events, could inhibit the elaboration, the integration and overcoming of grief symptoms, even eventually chronifying the grieving process, such as it happens in other kind of diagnoses. And the second one is called detachment. And, well, it's called decentering, sorry. And is defined as the ability to observe one's thoughts and feelings in a detached manner, as private, as temporary events in the mind, as neither necessarily truth nor reflection on the self. So this has been called in mindfulness to develop the observer perspective. And this is a very important ability to train in some therapies, such as the acceptance and commitment therapy or the metacognitive-based therapy, because the enhancement of this ability may lead one to respond less reactively to some external and internal stimulus and protect us from rumination or cognitive fusion. So to assess acceptance, we use the acceptance and action questionnaire that assesses the experiential avoidance of these painful emotions and feelings. And as you can see, there is a significant decrease in the avoidance of these feelings after the retreat that is maintained during the follow-ups. Indeed, the content analysis of our of the narratives of the ayahuasca experiences in our sample, we can see that a greater proportion of our sample explain that during the effects of ayahuasca they feel a very painful emotional confrontation. However, participants can understand the therapeutic benefits of this emotional confrontation differently. For some participants, it's meaningful and valuable as an act of love or as a way to honoring the disease or the mourning process. However, for others, the emotional confrontation was so painful that it's a way to put their daily pain in perspective. And for others, it's a way to gain relief in their symptoms and an opportunity to understand the depth of their feelings. This participant says, in ceremonies, I come face to face with many layers of sadness which I had no idea were also impacting upon my general feeling of grief and inability to cry. I was lucky to be given these visions early, and so was able to develop a deeper understanding of these experiences. I felt the release and recognition. Now I have a kind of friendly, accepting feelings towards sadness. On the other hand, decentering was assessed with the EQ decentering, and we also observed a significant improvement in disability after the retreat that is maintained during the follow-ups. And here you can see the only report in 2 where we have found a direct reference to this kind of psychological process in the narratives of the ayahuasca experiences. He says, I deal directly with the death of my brother during ceremony. The strange thing was the uncontrollable tears I cried, in which I was an observer to my body's response to the grief. I sat there with tears flowing, but felt numb to any pain. So, despite we didn't find many references in the narrative of the ayahuasca effects, we have observed references to this kind of process in the narratives about the benefits that persist of the ayahuasca experiences. So it seems that ayahuasca, the acute effects of ayahuasca, maybe are not qualitatively similar to other kind of experience, such as meditation, for example, where to develop the observer perspective is a critical factor in the practice. So the developing of this ability maybe could be derived from the afterglow effects of ayahuasca, which is characterized by a state of calm and mental clarity, or maybe is derived from the activation of other psychological processes, such as cognitive reappraisal, when someone can gain a wider perspective about one specific topic. Yeah? Both mechanisms shows a significant and moderate correlation with the principal scale, the Texas Revised Imagery of Grief. In the case of the Acceptance and Action Questionnaire, is a negative correlation indicating that there is a covariation between the decrease in the avoidance of these painful feelings and thoughts and the improvement of grief symptoms. And in the case of the centering, there is a positive correlation indicating that there is the improvement of the grief symptoms are correlated with the improvement of disability, the centering ability. So we use regression analysis to model the relation of the Texas Revised Inventory of Grief and many different variables, all the demographic data variables, all the related grief characteristics, such as the time, size, loss, or the cause of death, and both mechanism of action. And the only variable that were stable in the model was the Acceptance and Action Questionnaire, explaining the 59% of the variability in the Texas Revised Inventory of Grief. And this has sense because the principal scale is assessing the non-acceptance of death. And this is because the non-acceptance of death is one of the principal symptoms that can chronify a grieving process, as well as the excessive avoidance of the painful memories. So here we can see that for each point of improvement in the Acceptance and Action Questionnaire, we can also see an improvement of 0.6 of improvement in the Texas Revised Inventory of Grief. I said it well? Yes? Okay. So, well, thus far I have presented these study results. So let me talk about the direction that future studies could take. For sure that to reach generalizable conclusions, studies including a wider sample and randomized control trials have to be conducted. But even more interesting, in my opinion, is the research on the impact of ayahuasca in the prevention of grief symptoms, in the prevention of what has been called the persistent complex bereavement disorder. Because this can offer a valuable alternative for society to not prolong grief symptoms over time. But let me talk for these last minutes about the mechanisms underlying the improvement that we have seen previously. When we designed this study, we decided to assess the implication of acceptance and the centering in our outcomes. But now, after doing content analysis of the narratives of the ayahuasca experiences, we can infer many different kind of psychological process. So I would like to highlight some of them. And the report of this man who has lost his father can serve as an example. He says, "The grief has been healed by understanding my father's life when I was present with him during ceremony, feeling the connection with him that was and always will be. He is not gone. I'm able to live my life as an extension of his fractured soul, while growing myself to be a better man, father, lover, and citizen. Grief has been replaced by gratitude and joy." As Rosalinda Watts found in the psilocybin experiences of the Imperial study, we also have observed many references also to connection, especially to a connection with the disease. A connection that, as I have explained in previous talks, a connection that is transformed or reinforced after feeling the presence of the disease during the ayahuasca effects, and understanding that in one way or another, the disease continue existing despite their physical absence, and that he is well and everything is fine. So I'm not talking about the confirmation of some kind of religious belief or other kind of New Age ideas. I am talking about personal experiences and the ability and the right to give them meanings freely. And the creation of meaning is one of the most relevant psychological processes that we have analyzed. The creation of meaning underlies almost all the narratives that we have analyzed. And to give meaning to our life and to the life and death of the disease is one of the most important predictors in grief adaptation, because mourners yearn to give meaning to a world that had been shattered by the loss. And this participant says, "The grief has been healed by understanding my father's life. He had made sense of his father's life. And even more, he had made sense of his own life, finding a purpose of life, growing to be a better man, father, lover, and citizen, as an extension of his father's life, as an extension of his fractured soul." Can you see the depth with which this man looks at his father? It is as in William Blake's verse, "With my inward eye is an old man grey, with my outward a distel across my way." He can say, "With my outward eye is an old man grey, and with my inward is a fractured soul." Yeah? Ayahuasca provides us a visionary experience in the broadest sense of the word, to see beyond the material and literal world, to see beyond the facts. And this is a precious gift for us, Western mortals, which are suffering from a cultural myopia induced by the rigidity of our materialist myths that paralyze us when we are forced to face death, because in it we only see nothingness. Ayahuasca immerses us in the realm of imagination, the source of all creativity. And during a few hours, the doors of perception are open to perceive the mystery and to acquire a broader vision of what life is. And without having to receive the eyes of a sacrificed goat, we can find a balance in this double vision that allows us to endow existence with a deeper meaning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And we have time for questions.
I can speak loudly. What dosages of ayahuasca are you talking about here?
Those.
Yeah.
Well, this is an observational study, so we don't know the doses. It is many people who are going to the temple, and
So
there are
this was like at Santo Daime and
no
South
the
America?
no the Temple of the Way of Light is a center who is working with Shipibo indigenous, and well, we know that they use just psychotria and monasteriosis copy, but we don't know the doses that they are taking. This ayahuasca is not analyzed in the laboratory.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I was wondering, throughout the follow-ups for 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months, a lot of the participants seem to be dropping out.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, this usually happens also in observational studies, and more when it's an online data collection system that people, many of them continues traveling around South America or whatever, and they doesn't continue making the surveys, no. So the main lost in the sample is in the first screening. So the main the participants didn't arrive to complete the baseline assessment. It was 40 participants who didn't complete the baseline assessment. So we know that for most of them, it's not that the ayahuasca that they drank was so terrible that they doesn't want to continue the study. Only 3 participants expressed their desire to abandon the study. So this is the handicaps of these kind of studies.
I was just wondering, because I saw that in the baseline there was about 40, 35?
In the baseline, 46.
In one of the last slides you showed, I think there was 36 or something participants, and then at the 12-month follow-up it was only 25.
Yes, it's 46, in the post-assessment 35, and after that 27 and 25.
I was just wondering if you had the same results, if you only analyzed the 25 that made it all the way through.
Yes, indeed. When we have made many different analyses. Thank you for your question. And indeed, the participants who improve more is the participants that are worse, And the participants that are worse are the ones who continue completing the assessment, So maybe we can show these results also, because maybe are more interesting, But, well, we wanted to include it as much as possible participants, but that's what happened. Thank you.
Mike's coming.
During the follow-up, you said that some of them had some kind of psychotherapy experience. Do you know which kind of therapy they use? They use specific integration therapy, or they use classic psychotherapies?
Yes, we have some information about not of all, but some of them, and there are different methods. No, there are people who is saying that they are also continuing using ayahuasca as therapy, but we are not counting these participants. We have 2 participants who have attended to, how do you say this? I don't remember the name of the model, of the psychotherapeutic model, because it's not very known. But one of the was that, and the other one to acceptance and commitment therapy. The other was like focus on trauma, like the I don't know. It was too. The one was focused. The first one was focused on trauma, and the second was to accept the acceptance and commitment therapy. Yeah. No, we don't have this information. Sorry. Yes.
Do you think the Hi. Do you think the dissociation from grief mentioned has a neural correlate in dissociation between different brain areas?
The dissociation in grief has
the
a
dissociation
correlation.
from grief.
The dissociation from grief has a correlation with the dissociation in neurological areas.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't understand, as I can answer this question. What I have seen is that there is the ayahuasca effects have like a display of the ego states of mind, you know. Indeed, everybody says, ayahuasca told me, ayahuasca showed me. And we as psychologists, we know, we understand that it's not a plant, it's himself who is talking about himself, no? So, but when they have trust and confidence in Mother Ayahuasca, Abuelita, and this parental nurturing father, no, that is very known in the transactional theory, they can go hand by hand to the trauma, to the most difficult parts of themselves, and when they are suffering these traumas or whatever, they can give them love to this traumatized child, give them comfort, that in another way is not possible. They cannot access to this with this love, no? But there is like a dissociation in the ego states of the mind, to be at the end to a connection between all of them, no? And the abuelita, that is the nurturing father, the participant, that is the self, and the traumatized child, that is this child, can to be together in this kind of experience and give them the part that they were reliving. But I'm not sure how that is correlated with the neurological brain. I'm not sure.
Right.
Thank you. I would like to continue on what you were talking about right now. That many people say that ayahuasca showed me, ayahuasca made this happen to me. But if I understand it right, and from is that it's yourself, and
well,
ayahuasca is like a kind of like a portal.
Well, it also depends of the paradigm of the look of the paradigm or of your view, no? Inside of a cultural perspective and more in this traditional context, ayahuasca is a being that gives you this kind of visions, but under a psychologist and only the mind model, is yourself who is acquiring these broader visions of your life. But we don't know, it depends of the looks, of your own looks. Yes, I explain me?
Yes, and have there been any studying on what like the neuro connections in the brain? What happens, like how it looks before and after, like you get this realizations and how the brain rewires? Yes,
well, the Jordi Riba makes a lot of study with fMRI, and there are few studies also. What's the name of the eyes wide shut? Do you remember? Well, there is another study that they put. They make to imagine to the participants something, and after that they drink ayahuasca and see the areas of the brain that are activated. And there are interesting data there, no? Because people think that is the occipital part that is activated when you have this kind of visions, and that is not what Jordi Riba found, for example. He found very high activation in the prefrontal cortex, no? And parahippocampal structures, no? So, but I am not the best to interpret this kind of data. So maybe I don't want to confuse more.
Yes, but that was very useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonder, do you have any knowledge about toxicity of ibogaine in patients above the age of 65, cardiovascular disease or hypertension, these sort of problems?
I'm sorry because my English is terrible. Let me know if I have understand you very well. If I understand you well, if we have data about
safety of big doses of ayahuasca in elderly patients that may have cardiovascular disease, hypertension. It's a question that gets asked to me all the time because recently we've had 2 studies we looked at. Ayahuasca for alcoholism as opposed to ibogaine, and the other one with giving people a 10-minute session of DMT for grief. People who had lost a child to substance abuse in the last year do as well with DMT as they did with ayahuasca. One experience lasting 4 to 8 hours, and the other lasting 10 to 15 minutes. And that data is still being crunched, but we were really worried about giving this to people who had, previous cardiac stents and were on a bunch of hypertensives and things of that nature.
Yeah, in fact, this is an exclusion criteria, at least in the clinical trials that have been conducted in Barcelona, to have hypertension and to take some kind of medications is prohibited, So if I was in your foods, I didn't take this kind of risk, because there is an increase in the hypertension when you drink ayahuasca. And we are not sure about what kind of plants have some kind of alkaloids that could increase even more the tension, the arterial tension, So nowadays I didn't treat it.
Well, that was part of the idea that on the elderly, giving them DMT without the MEO inhibitor may pose less cardiovascular risk to the patients. It's being shorter and there's no MEO on board, so we might have lower serotonin levels and things of this nature. But this is all very recent, so we don't have the data to crunch yet. But almost out of the small group, only one person related a negative experience on either drug or said they found it not to be beneficial in helping them to grieve with the loss of a child, serious, fresh grief.
Well, I think that maybe the DMT experience is qualitatively different than an ayahuasca experience in a in a specific context, So take into account that these people drink ayahuasca an average of 7 times. Maybe it's not the first time or the second time when they have these kind of experiences. And also, there is a propose in this session that people talk with their facilitators in the temple, with the shamans also. The shamans are also singing for them special songs to release the symptoms or to say goodbye or to, they have this spiritual cosmovision, so they are using this kind of tools also to make his work, so it's different. And also, an ayahuasca ceremony is maybe 5 or 6 hours, and the DMT smoke, you said smoke.
Less than 10 minutes.
Exactly. So I think that there are many factors that can provide that this kind of experiences can happen,
We're at time, but I promised a mic here, so a short question.
You showed that outcome was better for those who continued drinking ayahuasca. Did they continue drinking at your center, the Temple of the Way of Light, or with different?
Well, it's not my center. I'm just
with the center where you did your study.
No, they didn't drink there. Nobody returned to the temple to drink ayahuasca during the follow-up. They drink in ceremonies in their own countries with different people.
Different people, different settings, but still had positive effect from that.
Yes,
So
yes. At least not more positive than before, but the improvement in the symptoms after the retreat are stabilized. 53 is a very low severity of grief. It's minimum, and this grief, these symptoms are stabilized when they continue using ayahuasca during the year.
Effect was not from only the specific procedure with Shipibo shaman singing specific songs in that center, but of ayahuasca in general.
Yes, during the follow-up, in general, we don't know what kind of sessions or ceremonies they have attended. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Débora.
Thank
so
you.
a warm applause for Débora.
Thank you.